I thought she called to argue. Instead, she said she'd sold my house. The words landed like an ice cube down the back of my neck, sharp. Cold, designed to provoke, Rebecca never called unless she had something to prove. And apparently, today was no different. "I've sold the house," she said, voice crisp, clipped, dripping with self-satisfaction. "The papers are signed. The new owners move in next week." I stared at the phone, then slowly brought it back to my ear. "The house?" I asked carefully, keeping my tone level. "You mean Dad's house?" "Oh, please, Olivia. Don't act confused." "Yes, that house. The one you've been squatting in rent-free for 2 years." I swallowed the immediate flash of rage that threatened to rise. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction, not today. Rebecca Matthews, my stepmother for the past 5 years, had never once hidden her disdain for me. She married my father when I was 23, a year after my mother passed. I was still grieving, still clinging to the home my parents had built together. A stately, historic house nestled under moss-draped oaks in Charleston. My father, Robert Matthews, was an architect and preservationist. He restored that house with his own hands. Every crown molding, every stained glass window, every creaking floorboard told a story, our story. Rebecca had wanted to repaint everything bay. "You'll need to vacate by Friday," she continued as if she were reading off a checklist. "The new owners want to begin renovations immediately. It's time you learned to respect your elders." It was so perfectly Rebecca, self-congratulatory, casually cruel and smug, in the assumption that she held all the power. She had no idea how wrong she was. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth balance the chill running through me. "Well, thanks for the heads up, Rebecca. I hope you got a good price for it." There was a brief pause on the other end. "That's none of your concern," she snapped. "Just make sure you're out. I'll be sure to pack up right away," I replied coolly. "Thanks for letting me know." I ended the call before she could say anything else. For a moment, I just sat in silence. The kitchen around me was bathed in the soft, golden light of morning. My father's mug sat beside the sink, still holding a small chip from when I dropped it the day he told me about his diagnosis. The walls bore the marks of time, photos, laughter, and paint swatches from failed DIY attempts. This wasn't just a house. It was the last place that still felt like him. And she had just sold it, or at least she thought she had. I reached for my phone again and scrolled to a familiar name, James Harrison. James had been my father's lawyer and one of his oldest friends. He was the one Dad told me to call after the funeral, saying only, "There are things Rebecca doesn't need to know, James will explain." And he had. "Olivia," he answered, voice warm and alert. "I was expecting your call." "She did it," I said. "She actually tried to sell the house." A low chuckle rumbled through the line. "Well, that didn't take long. Can we begin?" "I'll notify the buyer's attorney immediately. We'll stop this before anything final happens. Rebecca's walking into a storm, and she doesn't even know it yet. Make sure the buyers know the truth. I said I don't want innocent people caught in her mess. I'll take care of it." I set the phone down, my pulse steady now. It was strange how calm I felt. I should have been furious, maybe heartbroken, but instead, I felt ready. Prepared not for a fight in court or an explosive confrontation, but for something quieter, more final. My father had made sure of that. I stood and walked through the house slowly. Fingertips grazing the hand-carved banisters, the sun-warmed wood floor beneath my bare feet. Everything here had meaning. The reading nook by the window where he'd read me Treasure Island as a girl. The back porch where we'd shared long talks and late-night coffee. This wasn't just property. This was memory preserved in hardwood and mortar. Rebecca had always hated that. 3 months after the funeral, she tried to replace the stained glass windows with modern ones. "They're outdated," she'd said. "This place needs a woman's touch." I'd stopped her then, just like I was about to stop her now. She thought she'd won. She thought I'd be scrambling to pack boxes, panicking about where to go. But what she didn't know What my father made sure of was that she never owned this place to begin with. The day after his funeral, James Harrison had sat me down in his office, across from his mahogany desk and wall of legal books. "Your father saw this coming." He'd told me gently he transferred ownership of the house into a living trust in your name. Quietly. Months before his death. "Does Rebecca know?" He smiled faintly, and he wanted it that way. Now, as I stood in the front hallway, one hand resting on the old grandfather clock Dad had restored, I allowed myself a small smile. I wasn't happy exactly, but I was vindicated. I didn't need to raise my voice or retaliate. The truth was enough. She'd tried to sell what was never hers, and now she was going to learn what happens when arrogance meets foresight. I took a seat at the bottom of the stairs, pulling out my phone once more. A single text. "To James Harrison, she did it, time to begin." I hit send. I looked around again. The morning light spilled across the floor in amber waves. Somewhere outside, a mockingbird sang, unaware of the quiet storm building in legal offices across the city. Let her have her moment, I thought. Let her decorate a victory she hasn't actually won. Because what's coming isn't rage, it's consequence. And it starts, so I thought she called to argue. Instead, she said she'd sold my house. That was the first thing Rebecca said to me that Tuesday morning, her voice sharp with satisfaction, like she'd been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "I've sold the house," she repeated louder this time, as if I hadn't heard her. "The buyers sign tomorrow. You'll need to vacate by Friday." I stared at the steam rising from my coffee, trying to process her words. The house, my house. The one I'd lived in since Dad passed. The one he'd spent years restoring, molding with his hands, his sweat still in the floors, his breath in the beams. "You sold Dad's house?" I asked carefully, trying to keep my voice even. "Don't play dumb. Olivia, you know exactly which house. The one you've been squatting in since he died. Rent-free." "Well, that ends now." I felt a flicker of something cold slide down my spine. But I didn't let her hear it. "You're sure it's legal?" she scoffed. "Of course it's legal. I'm his widow. I have rights. I'm done letting you hold me back from what's rightfully mine." I nodded slowly, though she couldn't see it. "Good to know." And with that, she hung up. No goodbye. No explanation, just a dial tone humming in the silence of my kitchen like the end of a bad dream. Except this was no dream. "My name is Olivia Matthews. I'm 28 years old and I live in Charleston, South Carolina. Or at least I did, in the home my father left me when he died 2 years ago. It was a historic property near the old part of town, painted white with black shutters, a sprawling porch, hand-carved trim, and all. It wasn't just a house. It was history. Our history. My dad, Robert Matthews, had spent most of his life as a preservationist. He loved the old bones of Charleston, the stories they told, the echoes in the woodwork. After my mother died, it was just the two of us. He poured himself into the house, and I grew up watching him strip wallpaper, restain floors, replace rotted windows with exact replicas. He custom-ordered from Vermont. That house was his masterpiece, his gift. And after he passed, I stayed caretaking the home, the same way he had living in it, like he'd intended. Rebecca entered our lives late. I was 23 when they married. She was polished younger than Dad by 15 years. All designer handbags and sharp smiles. At first she played the part, warm, sweet, attentive. But that changed quickly. By the time Dad's health began to fail, she'd stopped pretending. She called the house dreary and outdated. She suggested open-concept renovations, gutted a guest bathroom without telling me, and once proposed turning the study, my father's sacred space, into a yoga room. I stopped her that time firmly, and from that moment on, I knew she considered me an obstacle. When Dad died, she wasted no time asserting herself. She moved his clothes out the day after the funeral. Started bringing realtors by just to browse. But I stayed calm, because I knew something she didn't. The week after the funeral, I'd met with James Harrison. Dad's old friend and longtime attorney, James, had been waiting for me. I still remembered the way he looked across his big oak desk. Fingers, steepled voice, gentle. Your father wanted to make sure you'd be protected. He explained that a year before his death, Dad had quietly transferred the deed to the house into a living trust, one that named me the sole beneficiary and owner. Rebecca wasn't listed, not as co-owner, not even as a successor. She'd never known. Because Dad never told her, because he'd seen her for who she was too. He was just too tired to fight by the end. So he planned instead, quietly, deliberately, strategically. That morning, as I stared at the phone in disbelief, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not because she'd tried to take what wasn't hers, but because now she'd made her move. The chessboard was finally lit, and I already knew where this game would end. I stood from the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, and walked the creaking hallway to the front door. Outside, the old live oak swayed gently in the breeze. I pressed my palm to the frame painted by Dad himself, just months before he got too sick to hold a brush. This was still my home. I picked up the phone and called James. "She did it," I said. He didn't need clarification. "Would you like me to begin?" "Yes," I replied, "and make sure the buyers are made aware. I don't want innocent people caught in this mess." "Understood." We hung up, and I exhaled slow and steady, like letting go of a breath I'd been holding since the day Dad died. I spent the afternoon wandering the house like I hadn't in months. Not just to remember, but to feel. The study still smelled faintly of his cologne. His old boots were tucked under the stairs. Rebecca never found them. In the hallway hung a picture of the two of us covered in sawdust, grinning with the pride of fixing something with our bare hands. Upstairs in the corner bedroom, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows we'd salvaged from a crumbling chapel in Savannah. I remembered the road trip, the laughter, the hours spent restoring the glass together. Rebecca had once tried to convince him to replace them with something less churchy. Dad laughed in her face. That was one of the last times I saw him really smile. Now she thought she could erase all of it, sell it to strangers, claim ownership over something she never helped build. But Dad had seen her coming, and now she'd stepped right into the trap. That night I didn't pack a single box. I made dinner. I sat on the porch with a glass of wine. I watched the sky turn amber and then fade to blue. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. Before going to bed, I pulled out my phone. One message. Just 6 words. She did it. Time to begin. And I sent it to James. Let her think she'd won. The real show hadn't even started yet. The silence the next morning felt deliberate, like the house was holding its breath with me. No more calls from Rebecca, no smug follow-ups, no threats, just a waiting game. And I was done waiting. By noon, James had emailed me a copy of the letter he'd sent to the buyer's legal team. A clean, fact-laden statement detailing the trust, the property transfer, and Rebecca's complete lack of legal standing. He was calm, measured, and merciless, in a way only seasoned attorneys knew how to be. "Expect fireworks," James had written in the email. But the fireworks didn't start with Rebecca. They started with a knock on the door. I opened it to find a man in his late 40s, looking uncomfortable in a crisp blazer that didn't quite fit. His expression shifted the moment he saw me. Shock, confusion. Then something like pity. "Ms. Matthews," he asked. "Yes." "I'm Daniel Carter. I'm the buyer, or I guess I thought I was." Of course, Rebecca hadn't wasted any time closing the deal. She was ready to hand the keys to strangers and erase everything. I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked through the front door like someone entering sacred ground. His eyes lingered on the woodwork, the handcrafted banister, the arching door frames. She told us the house was vacant, that it needed a little TLC. I gave a dry smile. She said it needed modernizing, didn't she? He nodded. "My partner wanted to knock out the kitchen wall, maybe raise the ceilings." Of course she did. I led him to the sitting room. "Have a seat, Mr. Carter. I think you're about to hear the most expensive lie Rebecca's ever told." We spent the next 20 minutes going through the legal documents James had prepped for me. Daniel read in silence, jaw tightening with each paragraph. When he finished, he leaned back and blew out a breath. "She didn't own it," he muttered. "No," I said calmly. "She never did. She signed everything. Contracts, disclosure statements. She even insisted we pay a non-refundable deposit." I swallowed hard. It sounded like Rebecca bold to the point of criminal. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this. I hope your legal team can recover the money." His eyes searched mine. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" I didn't answer directly. I just said, I knew who she was. I just didn't know how far she'd go. When he left, I watched his car disappear down the street, then stood at the threshold a while longer, hand resting against the old wooden doorframe. That house had stood for over a century. Weathered hurricanes, termites, financial crashes, and now Rebecca. And she was crumbling faster than the porch steps she once called an eyesore. The first text from her came that evening. "What did you do?" Then, "You tricked me, you set me up." And finally, "I should have known. Just like your father, always scheming." I didn't respond. Let her spiral, let her squirm. But the next day, it got worse. 3 missed calls, then 5. Then a voicemail I couldn't ignore. "You're going to ruin everything. The buyers are threatening to sue me. They said there's talk of criminal charges. You think you're so clever. You think this is what your father would have wanted." I played it twice, then deleted it. This wasn't about what my father would have wanted anymore. It was about what he prepared me for. That night, I sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, the old garden lights flickering above me. I sipped tea slowly, surrounded by the rose bushes Dad planted years ago. Rebecca had wanted to rip them out and pave the garden. Too old-fashioned, she'd said. But they were still here. Strong blooming. So was I. The next morning, James called. "She tried to list the house again," he said. I blinked. "What?" "She approached a different realtor yesterday. Claimed there was confusion, and she was clearing up paperwork. Fortunately, someone at the firm saw the letter we sent to the buyers and gave us a heads up. She's still trying to sell it." James chuckled dryly. "It's almost impressive." "Desperate but impressive." I didn't laugh. "She's not going to stop, is she? Not until she hits a wall she can't climb." I stared out the window, watching sunlight pour through the stained glass. Dad installed himself. Then maybe it's time to build that wall. I called Rebecca that afternoon. She picked up on the first ring. Well, she spat. "If it isn't the little queen of paperwork?" "Stop," I said quietly. "You think this is funny? You think you can humiliate me?" "No more games, Rebecca." She went silent. "You've committed fraud, you know that, right? Selling a house you didn't own, accepting money for it, lying to attorneys, to buyers." A pause. "You wouldn't dare go to the police." I kept my voice level. "I haven't yet." Silence again. Then she tried one last card. "Your father would be ashamed of you." "No," I replied. Voice steady. "He'd be proud. I protected what he built. Proud that I didn't let someone like you tear it all down." Another pause. This one longer. Then she whispered, almost like a warning. "You don't know what you've started." I didn't reply. I just hung up and sent James one more message. She tried again. "Let's go all in." That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, because the truth wasn't just on my side anymore. It was finally in motion. She thought she held the final word until the lawyer's letter arrived. For days after Rebecca's smug phone call, the house was unusually quiet. No more stomping footsteps overhead, no slamming drawers, just the hum of memory, like the walls themselves were waiting for something. Olivia didn't rush. That was Rebecca's style, fast, loud, desperate for control. Olivia's revenge, if you could even call it that, would be different. No screaming, no drama. Just facts, just time. The morning the letter went out, Olivia stood in the kitchen sunlight, spilling across the old tiles her father had once hand-laid. She stirred her tea slowly, letting the silence settle. It felt good. Clean. Mr. Harrison had confirmed the message was delivered. One to the buyer's lawyer and another to Rebecca directly. It contained everything. The trust documentation, the property record transfers, the clauses her father had put in place. Unshakable legal clear. By noon, the first explosion came. It wasn't a phone call. It was the screech of tires against gravel. Olivia looked up just in time to see Rebecca's sleek black Mercedes veer into the driveway, stopping just short of the porch. The door flew open, and there she was, heels, hair-red lipstick smeared like war paint. "Olivia," she shrieked, waving a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. "What the hell is this?" Olivia stepped onto the porch, but didn't flinch. "Hello, Rebecca." "You conniving little liar." Rebecca's voice cracked. "You set this up from the beginning. You let me go through a full transaction. You humiliated me." "No." Olivia said, voice low and even. "You humiliated yourself. You tried to sell something that was never yours." Rebecca marched up the steps, hands shaking. "I am his widow." That house was under Robert's name, and yet Olivia said calmly, "The trust documents say otherwise. Dad transferred ownership 2 years before he died. You were never listed." "You knew?" Rebecca spat, narrowing her eyes. "You knew this whole time, and you let me look like a fool." Olivia didn't answer right away. She looked at the rose bushes her father had planted, the ones Rebecca once tried to dig up. Then she looked back at the woman in front of her. "Yes, I knew, and Dad knew too. That's why he made sure to protect it. Protect me. You manipulated him." "No," Olivia said. "You tried, he just outmaneuvered you." Rebecca's breath caught like she'd been slapped. She looked down at the paper in her hand. Harrison's letter, now torn at one corner. "You think this is over?" "I think it's exactly where it should be." Rebecca's face turned white, then red. Her lips trembled. "You think you've won because of some piece of paper?" "You ungrateful." "No." Olivia cut her off gently. "I think I've honored my father's wishes. That's not winning, that's protecting." Rebecca's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she seemed truly at a loss. She stepped back slowly, as if the house itself had turned against her. Her shoes sank into the edge of the flower bed, but she didn't seem to notice. "This isn't over," she said finally, voice hoarse. "You'll regret embarrassing me." Olivia tilted her head. "You embarrassed yourself. I just confirmed what was already true." Rebecca turned on her heel, stormed back to her car, and drove away in a fury of spinning wheels and misplaced pride. A single sheet of paper floated out of her passenger window, landing in the grass beside the porch. Olivia didn't chase her. Instead, she walked down the steps, picked up the letter, and smoothed it with her hand. The legal language was dry, clinical, but to her, it was poetry. It was clarity. It was justice. She sat down on the porch swing, the same one where her father used to read on summer evenings. She folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket like armor. The air smelled like lavender and soil. Rebecca's perfume was already fading. Olivia exhaled slowly. The confrontation had drained her, but not in the way she expected. It didn't feel like a battle. It felt like removing a splinter that had been under the skin for far too long. Later that night, she walked through each room of the house, touching the furniture, the old door frames, the paintings her father loved. Nothing would change. Not now. The house was safe. Her memories were safe, and most importantly, so was her peace. She passed by the study where her father used to sit late into the evening. There was still a dent in the leather chair where he'd rest his elbow, a groove in the oak desk, where he'd tap his pen when he thought. She let her fingers rest on that groove, closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the wind picked up. The shutters rattled softly like a whisper of approval. Upstairs in her old room, Olivia opened a notebook and began to write. Not about Rebecca, not yet, but about the house, about her father's foresight, about what it felt like to reclaim something that had nearly been stolen. She wrote slowly, deliberately, like the act itself was part of the healing. She wrote until the words blurred, until her hand ached, until the ache felt like release. Just before bed, she checked her phone. One missed call from an unknown number. No message. She smiled. Some people fight with rage. I fight with truth, and truth always waits for its moment. My father's final gift wasn't the house. It was the proof he knew what was coming. That night, after Rebecca's theatrical retreat and vague threat, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. There was no sadness left in me. Only a slow burning awareness that this war she started hadn't ended. It had only changed shape. I remembered his voice low and rasping in his final weeks as he reached for my hand and said, "If anything ever feels wrong, check the fireplace. You'll know what to do." It had sounded like the rambling of a man too tired to explain more. But now, it pulsed in my memory like a heartbeat. The study was dark, only the moonlight slipping through the long curtains. I walked barefoot across the hardwood floors he had sanded himself. Every creak beneath my feet echoing like a reminder. Kneeling in front of the fireplace, I pressed gently on the third brick from the bottom left. It shifted. Behind it, wrapped in old wax paper, was a small envelope and a metallic flash drive. My hands trembled as I opened the letter, recognizing every loop and flourish in his handwriting. "Livy, if you're reading this, then she's done exactly what I feared. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you face to face. But time wasn't on my side. You must have already seen what she tried to do. But there's more. So much more." Rebecca didn't just want control. She tried to erase me slowly, quietly. I started suspecting her in the second year of our marriage. The sudden dizziness, the confusion, the strange taste in my tea every evening. I had my blood work done in secret, and the results pointed to a mild sedative. Not enough to kill me, just enough to weaken me. So I installed cameras. I documented everything. Conversations, the withdrawals, even her calls with a man I never met, someone she saw while I was in the hospital. I gave Harrison everything just in case. But this drive is your key. What you do with it is up to you. Just know this, you were always the one I trusted. You were never wrong to question her. The house, our garden, our family history, they're all yours, and now so is the truth. I sat back the letter in my lap, breath caught in my chest. Not from fear, from confirmation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. She had tried to poison my father. Not in the dramatized Hollywood way. Oh, she did it slowly. With calculation, with patience. Just enough to keep him tired, compliant, quiet. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. The files were neatly labeled, dates, times, footage of her stirring something into his tea, of her sitting on the phone with her back to the camera whispering to someone named Mark about waiting it out, of her opening his filing cabinet and tucking away papers he told me he had signed for me. It was all there, the proof. The weapon. I called Harrison the next morning. My voice was steady. "She tried to kill him," I said. A pause. "You found the drive?" he said gently. "Yeah. Do you want to go to the police?" I sat silently for a moment, staring out at the roses blooming in the garden, his roses. "No," I replied. "Not yet. I want her to know that I know, and I want her to stop pretending this is hers." He understood instantly. By noon, Harrison had drafted a legal notice. A quiet one addressed not to the police, but to Rebecca. A formal demand that she forfeit all current and future claims to the estate. If she refused, we would proceed with legal action based on fraudulent activity, and should we choose to escalate, attempted manslaughter. We didn't say it out loud, but we didn't need to. The letter was delivered via certified courier the next day. And then we waited. The first thing I noticed was the silence. She didn't call. She didn't come storming up the driveway. She didn't even send one of her usual passive-aggressive texts. But on the fifth day, a thick envelope arrived, postmarked from out of state. Inside was a signed legal document. Rebecca's full relinquishment of any and all claims to my father's estate, including the house. It was notarized, witnessed, and legally binding. There was also a handwritten note, barely a sentence long. "You win." No apology, no explanation, just surrender. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding that note, wondering if I felt satisfied. But the truth is, satisfaction wasn't the word. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was clarity, and I had it. I spent that weekend restoring the study. I took down the heavy velvet curtains she had insisted on. I replaced the tacky metal light fixture she hung over his desk with the one he had picked out from a vintage shop downtown. I opened the windows and let the spring air in. I placed his letter in a wooden frame and set it on the mantel, and then I walked into the garden. I knelt next to the roses he had loved. My hands moved through the soil like his used to, patient, intentional, alive. I realized then that the house was never what she wanted. Not really. She wanted erasure. She wanted to rewrite his legacy with her as the center of it. But she felt that she failed. Because my father had trusted me not just with bricks and beams, but with truth. And truth once known can't be undone. That night, I slept with the windows open, the scent of roses drifting into the house. I dreamt of his voice, calm, proud. Let her go, Livy. The roots are still yours. She tried to erase me from this house. But he wrote me into every brick. That thought came to me one morning as I stood barefoot on the wooden floor of the front hallway just after sunrise. The light spilled in through the stained glass my father had restored with his own hands. Gold, blue, and crimson patterns dancing on the wall like the memory of his laughter. The house felt different now. Not quieter, just more honest, lighter, as if it had finally exhaled. Rebecca was gone. A signed envelope from her lawyer had arrived the week before. Nothing dramatic, just a few crisp papers and a note that read, "You win." No apology, no explanation, just surrender sealed in ink. But that was enough. I spent the following days undoing her touch. The metallic light fixtures she'd insisted were modern and tasteful came down. First, I replaced them with the antique sconces my father loved, which I'd found carefully stored away in the attic. Under a sheet, I scrubbed away the ash-colored paint she had used to cover the fireplace and restored the deep cherry wood my father spent weeks sanding by hand. I opened every window and let the air flow through, letting the house breathe again. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming. Some evenings, I'd sit in his old leather chair in the study, feet tucked under me, and just listen. Not for voices, not for footsteps, just for the echo of memory, and it was there. In the creak of the floorboards, in the faint smell of cedar, in the dust on his bookshelves, untouched since the week he died. That's when I found the last letter. I had been cleaning out the bottom drawer of his desk, wiping down each corner like it was a sacred shrine, when I noticed a thin envelope wedged deep behind the drawer track. I tugged it loose. My name was written on the front, in his familiar, slightly crooked handwriting. It was dated just 4 days before he passed. I sat down slowly, already feeling my chest tighten. I unfolded the paper. Livy, if you're reading this, then Rebecca has likely done what I feared she would. And you, my brilliant girl, have stood tall just as I always knew you would. By now you know the truth. The tea, the bank withdrawals, the cameras, everything. I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. I had to let her believe she had control so she wouldn't suspect what I was building behind the scenes. You don't owe her anything, but you do owe yourself peace. Whether you use the evidence is up to you. Just remember, real strength isn't always about striking back. Sometimes it's in knowing when not to. You are and always have been my legacy. I love you more than I ever said out loud, Dad. I read it 3 times. The final line blurred as tears pooled in my eyes. But I didn't cry from sadness. It was something deeper. The kind of ache that comes when someone's love has protected you, even from beyond the grave. I walked over to the safe behind the painting. It was still there untouched. I opened it and placed the USB drive containing the surveillance footage inside. Footage that showed Rebecca slipping something into Dad's tea. Footage of secret phone calls, financial records she didn't know he saved. Proof that had I chosen to could have destroyed her, but I didn't. I closed the safe, locked it, not because I was afraid of her, but because I didn't need to be her. Let the truth rest there quietly, like a sword that never needed to be drawn. Not every battle requires a blade. The next day, I went out to the garden. The roses Dad planted were beginning to bloom again, deep crimson and pale yellow. Rebecca had once tried to dig them up, saying they were outdated. I had stopped her then. Now I pruned each one with care. Hands deep in the soil, sun warming my shoulders. I finally understood the house wasn't the legacy. A few neighbors stopped by in the weeks that followed, some to say hello, others to offer thinly veiled curiosity about what had happened. I didn't explain much, just smiled and said, things worked out. One afternoon, Mr. Whitaker from down the street, a man who'd known my father since high school, paused by the front gate while walking his dog. "You're staying, huh?" I wiped the sweat from my brow and nodded. "The house needs me," I said. He laughed. I think you're the one who needed the house." He wasn't wrong. This place held me together when the world tried to unravel me. It caught my grief and gave it form. It whispered truths my father didn't live long enough to say. And in every beam, every brick, every blooming rose, he left me a map, not to punish, but to preserve. One evening I stood on the porch steps with a cup of tea, mint, this time clean and clear. No poison, no lies. A breeze rustled the leaves, and somewhere in the distance, a wind chime tinkled, a sound my father loved. I closed my eyes. Justice hadn't come in a courtroom. It had come in quiet decisions. In restraint, in refusing to let someone else's bitterness become my identity. Rebecca had tried to erase me from this house, but my father had written me into every inch of it, and now I would write the rest. For him, for me, for the kind of love that outlasts betrayal. Because in the end, the legacy he protected wasn't a house. It was me, and that's something no one can steal. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. It waits. Olivia's story reminds us that true strength often lies in patience, in knowing who you are, even when others try to erase you. She didn't fight with rage. She fought with truth. And in the end, that truth protected more than a house. It protected her legacy. For anyone who's ever been underestimated or quietly pushed aside, let this be a sign. Your voice matters even in silence. If this story moved you or made you reflect, please give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about quiet courage, justice, and finding your voice when it matters most.